All right, we're back, Scott. One thing I've noticed, you have a very interesting background. Obviously, business, economics, education, international exposure for sure. You win all sorts of awards right now. Your career started in the financial arena, but then you have like a flurry of innovative startups. You're a speaker, and you're just a good guy, apparently. Um, Share with us how this has and you've evolved in your career. And are you, that infamous, are you at the point where you always wanted to be when you grow up?
Well, thank you very much for that question and comment. I think the way I look at my career and where I am today, as well as where I'm going in terms of trajectory, is that it's very much the process. And more than anything else, I think I really enjoy the process and the journey along the way. And the journey has been something that's been incredibly edifying because it's over the years in past entrepreneurship, past ventures, and the work that I've done. I've learned a lot. There are areas where I clearly had some weaknesses. Areas where I was not as comfortable. So, for example, one of the ways that I really try to self-actualize is doing the things that's uncomfortable, that's not natural for me. So naturally, as somebody who's very introverted, who's shy, who's preferred to always be in the background rather than on the forefront, for me to come on stage to speak, to write, and be a public figure of some sort, it's been very uncomfortable, but at the same time, that's exactly what I needed to do to get to the next stage in terms of my career and the meta impact. Because ultimately, the impact that I want to leave in terms of legacy is global in nature, and it's meant to have a deep, profound, sustainable impact to humanity. And that's hopefully some of the work that I'm doing around artificial intelligence and friendly AI.
Was this an arena maybe called something different that you were always interested in?
As a kid, I was always a very creative and thinking outside of the box type of a kid that easily can visualize very difficult, complex concepts and be able to see somewhat of kind of like an oracle, see the future of how things will eventually converge and become something new. So that's something that's innate in terms of kind of a skill set that I've had. And I just tried to hone into that and use empirical research and primary and secondary to reinforce and support and identify key opportunities and then to pursue those either directly or through some sort of consortium or through an industry level. And that's exactly what we're doing with Internet of Things. We saw this trend, this convergence point a couple of years ago. We've researched it, we talked about it, and now what we're doing is we're actually helping to shape it, which is very important because at the end of the day, when an industry gets to a certain product life cycle, they're going to hit certain roadblocks, whether that's security, whether that's privacy, whether that's standards and protocols. As an example, we're actively actually creating technologies and the know-how and the frameworks and the methodologies to be able to address some of these roadblocks that's impeding Internet of Things and other emerging technologies from, taking on ubiquitous, widespread.
It's interesting. I was talking to another entrepreneur yesterday at a cyber tech conference, and we were talking about when things started and whatnot. And I actually remember clients, and name clients back in when you were a lot younger and I was young, and when they would tell me literally, and I won't name the clients, but companies you would know saying, things are going great. We don't really need a website, whatever that thing is, a website, or the internet or anything. And how far, which is an understatement, things have advanced. But in a way, do you find that too when you said before, where leaders sometimes things are moving so fast, and they are. You're in an industry that's moving like ferociously fast. How do you combine the two where you're almost telling them that they do need it, but if things are going well, they're not sure they need it, and they're scared of it at the same time?
Right, absolutely. And I recently was invited to join the steering committee of a very large IoT conference series out of London. And part of the challenge that they have is how do they curate the kinds of education and content and exchange that's going to actually help address some of the concerns that you're bringing up. I think a majority falls on the kind of the late majority or or the late adopters, where they're very much going to wait until everybody else has adopted technologies.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we're less interested in them, to be honest with you. We are interested in the early adopters and the early majority, where they recognize that there are some transformative, disruptive, not just technology, but fundamentally we're talking about business models, where they can be proactive about it, or they can choose to have a complacent mindset, and as a result of it, potentially get displaced, lose market share, or become obsolete. We've seen that. We've seen what it's done in terms of the telcos. We've seen what it's done to some of the tech giants, as an example. Mm-hmm. Even Microsoft has taken a big hit. So there's no guarantee just because you were big in the past that you're going to continue to be big and maintain that market share.
Right.
So I think, especially in large corporate enterprise environments, it's difficult to overcome the herd mentality. And this, again, goes back to the need for individual leadership to exercise openness, experimentation, and curiosity. And the way you manage this dynamic environment is small incremental experimentation. And that's really what we encourage with our clients as well. So that way, they're building skill set, they're experimenting, they're testing their hypotheses, and there's measurable results that they can actually quantify and do something with.
Yeah, I was talking to the chief security officer of Palo Alto Networks yesterday, and he was talking about how they're, the whole sharing. I mean, when I was a kid, my parents told us don't share with each other, but don't share with anybody else, and all that. Now, obviously, things have changed, but they've also formed a mini consortium of competitors even that share knowledge, and then they have their products do their competing. Is there the same type of sharing, if you will, in the Internet of Things world?
It's interesting. One of the things that we're starting to see that's becoming very much going to be a reality soon is this notion of sharing of data. Not too long ago, even current day, most firms are very, very closed system when it comes to sharing out their firm-specific data. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that I think people are recognizing is because the Internet of Things is awakening and deriving sensory data from objects and things around us, including their operations, now they're actually not only increasing the volume of data sets, but they're also increasing the data types, in particular around unstructured data. And moreover, those that are a little bit more forward-looking also see that there's an opportunity to start to monetize that data. So like I said before, some of the business model transformation that we're going to see is that many companies today that sell physical products will eventually in the future may have another tier that's on top of that product. That's the data subscription model. So let's take the example of Siemens, Bechtel, URS, Auto, any of those that are kind of in the building, smart building and potentially smart city environment. Well, the kinds of sensors that can go into their products will eventually be able to help provide monitoring, whether it's monitoring of their equipment, their physical assets, and the efficiency, as well as the deterioration, and when potentially there needs some rework or technician support that's needed, as an example. Well, all of those can start to become productized and become available to others that are the property managers, the property owners, the agencies, and other operators that's actually using those physical assets. So that's a brand new revenue stream, revenue source, frankly, that wasn't available before, as an example.
Can companies do that with their talent too?
Well, as you know, the labor market has become much more fluid. So the typical boundaries and the employment clauses is not as rigid as before. So it's more project-based. So depending on the project need and the skill set. So, for example, on the data analytics side, it's very difficult to find the right skill set that are AI scientists, machine learning experts, statisticians, mathematicians, algorithm experts. So it really does require this kind of project-based and identifying the right skill set. And then once that project is over, dispersing them, and then the next project, you need a different skill set, specialized skill set, you bring those people in. And certainly, you look at even big companies like IBM, they recognize that part of that labor force and that environment also involves not necessarily working out of a physical office environment. Right. So most of IBM worldwide, they work from home. and of course they converge onto their client sites and physical conference sites and so forth. But for the most part, it's a virtual labor force that's completely distributed across the world.
Yeah, no kidding. You've noted that most emerging companies don't make it to Series A because they have difficulties solving critical challenges. I saw that, such as finding product market fit, raising capital, obviously, and increasing brand awareness. And we see a lot of startups where, as you've seen, they have to decide, do I raise money or do the business? And it's a tough choice, obviously. What do you think, in your opinion, what you've seen? What's the quote-unquote secret sauce for Joe or Jane's startup CEO to not only survive but actually thrive?
It's a tough question, and I wish I could provide a formulary type of equation or function. But the reality is, it requires hard work. It requires perseverance, resolve. The reality is, out of the millions of entrepreneurs or even developers that go into the startup environment, many of them will fail. But the question is, it's not about the idea or even the project that they were working on, but them as an individual. How did they actually learn from that experience? Because what we look for is serial entrepreneurs, meaning those that have failed, and actually we like that they failed because hopefully they've learned. And if they came back, they're much better than before. And typically it's not uncommon that on their third, if not 10th or 30th try that they make it. And we know from examples of Einstein and many other inventors that Dyson and others, that it's never the first time. It's not about that, but it's about the perseverance and resolve. Now, with that said, I have to say, your aptitude, your skill set, and your knowledge is incredibly important. Those that are highly successful recognize what they don't know, like I said, and are continually adding to their knowledge set. So I try to, although I'm not a scientist, by profession, I try very hard to read up on articles, technical articles, and books, and continually refine and enhance and deepen my expertise. And that's what you need, is you need very competent, very knowledgeable experts that's involved in your startup so that you are successful. Because too many startups we speak with, a lot of their hypothesis, a lot of their skill set, it's just not quite right.
And they're sold on what their product or service is beyond anybody's opinion or anything, and they just stick to it until it's dead. Is that it?
Yeah, I think definitely I've seen some of that where there are startups that are run by mostly PhDs coming out of universities, and there is a certain degree of hubris that they exude, and unfortunately that can be a stumbling block to their success because they believe that they know more than the average Joe. When in fact maybe they have a disconnect with the actual user base, user engagement, and they're so wrapped up in the core technology that they never really thought it through in terms of actual user experience. So there's a lot of that as well. But certainly, it's never about the idea. The idea is cheap, but how crystal clear and crisp is your idea relative to that particular persona, that segment, the use case, the application, that industry, and the timing. The timing is incredibly important. And many entrepreneurs are either too late to the game or too early. So part of the reason I think, I've found success is making sure that timing is, when you look at your startup, your product that you're building, instead of looking out next 5-10 years out, look at the next 1 to 3 years out, because if you can't monetize it in that window, it's probably not a good fit.
Yeah, and if you don't have competition ever, it's probably not going to happen either, right?
That's right.
Yeah. What do you find the potential risks and opportunity are of wearables in everyday life, not to mention in business and education and security, you name it?
Well, I think I think I've said it before. It's security, it's privacy. So if you look at Europe, for example, EU. By the way, I was in London when the whole Brexit and the referendum to leave occurred, so it's a historical moment.
No kidding.
And I'm not going to comment on it politically, but what I can say is that from a policy and legislation, you have things like GDPR and others that are getting into kind of the data privacy aspect. So more and more, there's pressure by government agencies, regulators, and privacy advocates to make sure that this is in place. Now, The challenge, of course, is that it's hard to have a common standard protocol, or let alone an enforcement of that with the various device manufacturers, or the network providers, or the communication providers, or the decentralized app makers, and the whole ecosystem. So the privacy is going to be huge. And one of the areas that we're trying to address that is both from internal development, but also through partnership. So through a partnership with Miko, that's based in London as well as in Australia, they're really focusing on the identity management aspect, and I think they're doing it the right way. And they're also adding, of course, aside from the encryption aspect, blockchain capabilities. And we're also working on technologies that's addressing privacy as well. And that's super important, because if everything can sense everything from your physiology, your psychology, your emotion, your cognitive load, your context, your movement, I mean, pretty soon it's going to be very difficult to not be known, right? So, and you don't know that the safeguards are necessarily in place, because even if, let's say, for example, I happen to be in a hotel today, even if the hotel is doing their best with their privacy aspect, how do you know that that data that then becomes, commercialized or shared through a data brokerage or a third party through API services is going to ensure and maintain the integrity of your data through obfuscation, anonymization, or whatnot? So a real big challenge. Security is another big challenge. It's somewhat of a flip side of it, where the traditional means of securing computing from a kind of a centralized computing model is no longer as relevant or necessarily pointedly directly addresses the nuances of the Internet of Things. Internet of Things, unlike computers and mobile phones, is a constant, continuous connection between the publisher and subscriber, and is highly susceptible to playback attacks. Moreover, because IoT, by definition, is really decentralized before it gets to a centralized environment like a computing environment, it has to go through multiple nodes or multi-hub. You don't have guarantee that those nodes, which could be devices or a small M2M footprint, has the capacity, let alone the OS, to be able to have antivirus, any of that sort, or have the right certificates or the security policies or standards in place. So it only takes one wrong hop into one wrong node or device, and that packet or that information becomes vulnerable and compromised. So lots of big issues, and again, there we're actually proactively working on technologies that addresses through multicast, mesh, peer-to-peer mesh network with certain types of very interesting standards and protocols coming out of research, and of course supplemented with blockchain.
Yeah, it's amazing. I remember Ryder System, Ryder Trucks way back has been a big client of mine. I remember, again, going back to the late 80s, them showing me all the sensors and whatnot of knowing where every package was, every truck was, everything was, and that was considered big time back then. So, and now you got hackers, hacking into the refrigerator at some of my real estate clients' homes that they sell to get to their internet, to get to their business.
Yes. I mean, it's incredible. We get paid because of our expertise to test new products that's coming onto market, and one of the products that they asked us to test is a vacuum, which is similar to iRobot. Now, what's very interesting about that is it has a camera. So now even your vacuum cleaner has a camera, and it's able to video camera the people that's in the house remotely. That's and if that gets intercepted, that can be quite scary.
So that could lead to internal monitoring of your house, to maybe even having community police robots walking around.
Very interesting indeed. And that's really the work that we're trying to do, is on the friendly AI side, in particular what we call empathetic friend AI, where we're starting to really develop some patents and IP around how do we develop AI in such a way that eventually, as it gets closer and closer to strong AI, that it is very much going to share the value principles of humanity, and that it's working with us and for us rather than against us.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to complete this segment. Really quick, the way I came to United States was I was recruited by a global leadership development organization to come to Coral Gables, and I traveled around the world and whatnot. and I took a pay cut, and I went to a nonprofit, and everybody thought I was crazy. But it's the best job I ever had for the least amount of money. But it led me to a lot of great stuff. So I totally admire your why, if you will, and I think you're doing great stuff, and I appreciate you sharing it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for the invitation.